We now have our About page and our About user component routed with the username. Now let's talk about how we can get the username parameter out of the URL into our About user component and how we can use that to grab that user's information. Let's take a look at what the Angular router provides us for getting information out of a route. To get route information out of the route, we will use something called the activated route. Now this is an object that Angular router provides us that gives us a lot of different information about what current route we're on. We have things like the URL that we can grab. We can grab things like data. And the thing that we're most interested in right now is the parameters, which we'll grab out of the params. We also have access to query parameters, fragment, the router outlet, since we can have different outlets that are named differently, and even more things like child routes, parent routes, and stuff like that. To get the current route parameters, we're going to use this.route.snapshot.params. Let's go ahead and use that piece of code in our About user component to grab the username out of the URL. Over in Sublime Text, we'll close that, and in our About user component, we're going to use ng-on-init. And ng-on-init is one of those lifecycle hooks that runs right after the component is instantiated. Grab the current username. Since we're using ng-on-init, let's go grab that interface. And we'll implement that on our class. Next, we will grab that activated route that we just talked about. We'll grab import activated route, and we'll pull that from the Angular router. We need to add this to our constructor so that we know how to grab the route. And we'll do private route, and we'll pass in the activated route for that. Now we can grab the username out of that snapshot, this.route.snapshot.params, and we'll pull the username out of there. We'll save that into letUsername equal, and we'll console log the username just to be sure that we have it. Let's inspect element, and in the console we can see that our username is logged out. Back into the About page, click on another user, we'll see that username gets logged out, and our third user gets logged out as well. Let's go ahead and grab some data. We're going to get that users array out of about.component. We'll grab all of these users, and let's bring in that export class as well, since we had to use that here to define, and we'll just paste it in here. While this is definitely not the most efficient thing we can do, since we're now repeating code across different files, we'll just leave it like this for now, since we will refactor this in the very next lesson to make sure that this is going to be a lot cleaner. Once we have this username, we're going to grab it out of that users array. We'll do users.find and function user return user.username is equal to username. And we'll bind that to a user that we add to our class. This.user is equal to, now we're going to have a user for this About user component, and we're going to look through that users array. We'll find the user where the username is equal to the username that comes out of our URL parameter. Now that we have that user, let's show that user in the component template. We'll do div, and we just want to make sure that this shows if and only if we have a user. We're going to do an h2 tag. Actually, let's make this an h1 since this is going to be the primary header for this page. And we'll bind the user.name. We'll pass in the user.username as well. We'll do an image. We'll bind the source property binding to the user.avatar. And just like the other component, We're going to add a class of image responsive and image circle. Now we have a private route object, which is the activated route object coming from the Angular router up here. We're going to grab a snapshot of this route. And the reason we're doing snapshot here is because the actual params is able to return an observable, which we will talk about later in this course. Right now, we only need one username, so we'll just use the snapshot, which is the current state of this router. Grab the username, find the user that has that same username in the array of users, and we'll bind that to this user. Let's take a look. All right, so we navigated to this page. We have a picture of Holly here and her user profile. Let's go back to the About page. Back to Nick. We have his user profile and mine as well. Let's do a little styling here. Let's add a class of Jumbotron to this, and we'll do text center as well. And styles. We're going to make sure that this image isn't that large, so we'll do max width is 50%. And also margin 20 pixels auto to center it and give it a little margin on the top and bottom. All right, looking good. That's a little wide as well. Let's do max width 300 pixels. All right, that's a little bit cleaner, a little bit smaller. So now it's easy to see that our user profiles are able to pull from the username in the URL parameter, and we're able to display that. All right, so next up, our About user component and our About component have this export class and this array of users here. It doesn't really make sense to have both components have a reference to users. We're going to bring that out and refactor it so that it's a little bit cleaner and we have users in one singular location.